Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, Charlie King, to the PVC NYC TV, which is the name I've assigned to this series of interviews for the People's Voice Cafe. And thank you for joining us. We're looking forward to a great show with you and with Tret Fure on December 9th here in New York. And just want to give our folks an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So let's start at the beginning. I mean, where were you born? How were you raised? What inspired you to get started in music? What fired you up?
How much time do we have? I was born in Brockton, Massachusetts, which is kind of a tough shoe factory town, south of Boston. Rocky Marciano comes from there. Martin Hagler comes from there. Marvin Hagler.
Marvelous Marv. Yeah, I remember.
And Sacco and Vanzetti were framed in Brockton. Very rich history of brutality associated with that. And how was I raised? Well, I guess probably not typically Brocktonian. I lived on a dead-end street, not a lot of kids, certainly no kids, all retired people except for my family. I've got 3 siblings. And I was sent to Catholic schools, so I wasn't in the Brockton public school system. And I come out of a family that was quite conservative. My dad was a blue-collar Republican and Irish Catholic who voted for Nixon against Kennedy. That's pretty street creds for a Republican. Yeah, and 2 of my 3 siblings still remain in that party, although it's getting harder and harder to stay there. And then my sister and I are once we left home, we changed our political affiliations. So going from being a young volunteer in the Goldwater campaign to being a street protester against the Vietnam War in college, that was sort of a short but radical trajectory. And a very alienating one for me and my dad. And fortunately for me, the only thing my dad and I could do in those years that we didn't fight about was make music. So singing has been a real bridge builder for me. Singing has been just at the heart of it for me. I remember reading somewhere about a great chef, or maybe it was James Beard, I don't know, but when he was a toddler, he crawled to the kitchen and he found an onion on the floor and he ate it. And that's how he knew he was made to be a chef. And my earliest memories are of singing with my family or singing for my family. We all had our party piece. Mine was Ragtime Cowboy Joe.
Okay.
And once I got into school, I joined choirs, I joined glee clubs, I tried out for musical theater, and got caught up in the big folk scare in early 1960s. Boston was an interesting folk scene, lots of clubs. Known now, I think, as the least political of the urban folk scenes of the 1960s, but very rich in music, and I got to see a lot of wonderful performers at the Club 47, which is now Passim's, and Charles Street was lined with clubs. So I had a lot of opportunity to hear folk music growing up, and it was again something my dad and I shared. He loved the Weavers and didn't know much about their politics, but he loved their music, so music has been the heart and soul of it for me. Once I got into college, I was part of a folk trio in high school. And once I got to college, I started showing up at open mics and trying to establish myself as a performer, which is something I'm still trying to do.
Funny guy. Where did you go to college and when did you start playing guitar?
I started sort of playing guitar in high school. I started out with a ukulele, a baritone uke, and then someone gave me a guitar maybe they sold it to me. I don't know. But apparently the legend is that it was stolen at the Newport Folk Festival. But anyhow, it wasn't much of a guitar. It was a nylon string classical guitar, kind of beat up. And I took the lower two strings off of it so I could play it as if it were a ukulele. And but eventually added the lower two strings and started playing guitar in high school and took it with me to college. And started teaching myself. Just got a book with some of my favorite folk songs in it and taught myself to do the chord progressions. That's basically it. Learned to play a harmonica on a harp frame, and I was hot stuff, So started showing up at open mics.
You were a chick magnet, man. You had the harmonica and the guitar.
Oh yeah. A one-man band. So this was in Cleveland. I went to, where did I go to college? How much time do you have? It took me 4 colleges to get a bachelor's degree. And then I went on and was living in New York City when I got a couple of masters there, none of which I really use. I probably owe these schools money because of the fellowships I used up and have never really put it that much into practice. But I kind of partied my way out of school after school. So too much rock and roll, not enough hitting the books. So,
well, you said you got into the folk scene. You said it was a little less political, but at some point, your ear and inclinations, went to a more advocacy direction. Mm-hmm. And who were the artists that led you there? What were the inspirations and catalysts that led you in that direction?
Well, the political nature of folk music in the 60s was inescapable. I'm told you would get a heavier dose of it in New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco. But living in a very conservative household, the folk music was sort of softening me up. My early devotions were lavished on Dave Van Ronk. He was one of my favorite performers, and he was a strange leftist thug, as our ex-president likes to categorize people, and Pete Seeger. And I bought that 1963 We Shall Overcome, a Carnegie Hall album of Pete's. Yes. And I played it over and over and over, just wore out the grooves on it. And so that was kind of softening me up. I don't know how I dealt with the cognitive dissonance of being like a fan of folk music and a fan of conservative politics, but I think it did me good in the long run. It makes me a little bit slow to judge and a little bit humbler about my own convictions. But yeah, and then one night I hitchhiked into the Club 47 in Cambridge, and I heard Phil Oakes, and he just scared the life out of me.
Really?
Yeah.
Scared? Yeah. Why did
I mean, here he is, this fella up there, and he's saying, I am not now, and I never was a member of the Republican Party, and just lots of, sort of frank, out there political pieces. And the Boston audience was really not up for it, When it came time for his encore, people sort of beat down every song he suggested. All they wanted to hear was Edgar Allan Poe's The Bells, They wanted to hear his least political stuff. And this is before he did Pleasures of the Harbor, I believe. So, It was basically a softening up process. What really shifted me was getting out from underneath my father's roof and having a radical roommate in college and getting involved in resistance to militarism in the draft. Everyone who went to the college that I went to was forced to take 2 years of ROTC, and I found it really intolerable. The way violence was condoned against civilians. I think that was a turning point for me. The sort of celebration almost of the bombing of cities in World War II. And then I started reading about the Vietnam War, and that was very sobering. And so I ended up with a resistance movement on campus. We set up vigils and tables to present alternatives to the recruiting stations that the military was setting up on campus. And if I hadn't partied my way out, I probably would have become part of the 4-year peace movement there. But I couldn't quite settle down to that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I have my limited experience with the Boston area, which was much later in the late 70s, and I was not a fan on the racial front. And as my freshman year in college, a woman who was at our school, a black woman who was at our school, was chased down and beat up on Boston Common, and this was this was fall of 1977 or spring of 78. And of course, all of us saw the terrible violence that occurred during the desegregation battles only a few years earlier. So, did the civil rights struggle, fit into the changes that you were going through, or was it really more focused on Vietnam?
Well, I think probably my introduction to the civil rights movement was the music that was being sung by Pete Seeger. That Carnegie Hall concert was all about the civil rights movement. Joan Baez, Tom Paxton had some songs, Phil Oakes certainly, and then the Freedom Singers. And so, as I said, it was, some kind of cognitive dissonance that I could be holding both these things at the same time. But it was the Vietnam War that really turned me, and I applied for status as a conscientious objector. And at that point, the whole American history of nonviolence, which is something I was unfamiliar with, and nonviolent resistance became important to me, and that sort of drew me directly into the freedom struggle. And I did get to hear Martin Luther King speak shortly after the Riverside Church speech where he came out against Vietnam. And so
right, in 67, yeah.
Yeah. And he spoke shortly after that in Washington, D.C., and I think it was Clergy and Laity Concerned About Vietnam sponsored that. And we marched to the Arlington Cemetery from the hall the church where he spoke. So I had that, in the same room with Martin Luther King experience. So he became quite important to me. And I was living in a rural section of Kentucky when he was assassinated. And there was a lot of antipathy on the part of white people there, and a lot of grieving on the part of African Americans there. And I had become involved with the NAACP in this small Kentucky town, and so I was more part of their response to it. But I remember that a lot of white people, people who I thought should have known better, just said, well, they sort of treated him like he was a terrorist who got what was coming to him.
Right.
So.
And why were you in Kentucky?
Say it again.
Why were you in Kentucky?
I was working at a church-sponsored poverty program in 4 counties of eastern Kentucky. And it was around the time that a lot of secular groups were being red-baited out of Kentucky, the Appalachian Volunteers being a key example of that. But we were under the sort of safe aegis of a church body, so we were kind of left alone. Yeah.
Interesting. So in the three-legged stool of what I call the three-legged stool of progressive politics that came out of the 60s, the third leg, which we haven't talked yet about, is labor. And you are certainly somebody who has embraced the labor struggles of this country and internationally with both arms, if I may use that phrase. So where did that, obviously we know Pete was involved, et cetera. How did your involvement with all of that develop, and your work with the AFM Local 1000, et cetera? How did all that develop?
These are very complicated questions. Are not complicated, but they're not subject to easy answers, short answers. But
that's fine. That's fine. We want to tickle people's interest to learn more about Charlie King.
When I was living in New York, actually before I moved to New York, I became familiar with the Catholic worker movement in New York, and they're very much allied with the cause of labor. That's how they initiated, was in support of union organizing in New York. And Dorothy Day was still alive and living at the Catholic Worker then, and I moved in there after I graduated from college, finally got my degree, and started working with the United Farm Workers. Because the Catholic Worker was a close ally and a home for United Farm Workers. And so I got to be singing on a lot of picket lines, vigils, fundraisers. And at the same time, I got connected to the New York chapter, I guess you would call it, or amoeba, whatever, loose organization of the Industrial Workers of the World, who were pretty active in New York at that time. And it was from them that I learned a lot of the old labor anthems, which gave me things to sing on the picket lines and at the fundraisers and all. And so it was pretty natural once I started writing songs to also start writing songs about labor struggles. And I was singing at a street demonstration for striking firemen in New York, and Barbara Dane was there, and she heard me singing and invited me to come into a studio because Paradon Records were making their musical magazines at that point. Bev Grant was singing for them, and Peter Jones and Steve Jones were singing for them, and a lot of international groups were singing for them. And so anyhow, I came in and recorded a song. That was my first experience of recording a song. And that was good to be able to hear myself when I wasn't singing. And as I continued to write songs in New York City, which was for me, a very prolific time, I would go down to WBAI and record them in the studio and then run home to listen to them on the news that night. So I was getting a lot of incentive to write songs around labor and community organizing.
And you've been a member of many, well, as you've been an individual performer for years, obviously, but you've also been a member of many different groups, many different collaborations. Of those, which do you consider to be sort of the most either formative or the most gratifying, associations that you had the opportunity to be a part of?
Well, musically, it would have to be Bright Morning Star. Which was it evolved into a kind of a folk cabaret act. And we toured North America for, I don't know, a decade, I would say, until we ran out of money. We would go off and we would tour for 2 or 3 weeks, get out to the West Coast and come back, and then we'd pass the hat, and if everybody threw in a 20, then we could pay our bills and go home. So because we were better at making music than making money, we eventually kind of unraveled there. But Bright Morning Star was an enormous influence on my ability and my style of performing in public, taking it in a more theatrical and expressive direction. The first time I went to the Club 47 in Boston, I went to hear a local Boston singer. You might have run into him, Jackie Washington. And he was singing these lovely ballads on the Club 47. And I ordered a cup of tea at the advice of the waitress, and she brought a pot of honey. And and while Jackie Washington was singing "Spanish is a loving tongue," I stirred honey into my tea and struck the side of the cup with my spoon, and everyone in the club turned and looked at me. It was a very very tightened down listening room, and you didn't want to make any waves. It didn't stay that way. I remember probably 6 years later going to hear Muddy Waters Blues Band there, and everyone was dancing on the tables, and nobody cared what you did with your spoon then. So I've completely lost the thread there. Where was I going with all that? Oh yeah, Bright Morning Star.
Groups that influenced you and shaped you. Yeah.
Well, a big part of it is just watching other performers and learning the songs of other performers. I was sort of a three chords and out kind of a guy, and a lot of the Americana song bag and the British Isles song bag you could get through with three chords, but then you start singing songs by other artists, and they have more interesting chord progressions and music, and some people even knew what they were doing. I mean, Rick Burkhart's got a PhD in composition, and it shows every time he writes a song. So learning to sing those people's songs, I early in my recording career, I came in contact with a fellow named Dave Gordon, who was a self-taught musician and one of the most brilliant songwriters I ever had the honor to meet and to work with. And unfortunately, he did not live that long, but he left a wonderful musical legacy, and I'm still trying to learn to play those songs. It's a rare night that I don't play a Dave Gordon song. Other influences, well, I think, I have to talk about the People's Music Network, because we came together in the late 1970s because we felt like the energy that was around folk music in the 1960s had really waned, and we certainly were getting a lot less media attention than we were back in the days of Hootenanny on television. So we sort of came together as a collective to sort of support one another and to encourage each other to keep doing music and to learn one another's music. So that introduced me to lots of performers, both as models, songs that I could learn to perform, and also a sense of being a part of a collective, mutual support for one another. And the Great Labor Arts Exchange, another big influence, and that certainly reinforced working around songs in support of organized labor, and pretty quickly led to the question, well, if we're singing on farm worker picket lines, if we're singing on nurses picket lines, if we're supporting the mine workers, how come most of us here at this Great Labor Arts Exchange don't belong to the Musicians Union? And the answer was, it was kind of irrelevant to us the way it was set up, because it was so, we were doing one night stands around the country, and they were very much geographically based. So in a way, they were kind of the enemy. We had to file contracts and pay dues to locals that would not in any way benefit us. So that led to establishing our own traveling musicians union within the AFM, which, bless their hearts, they were flexible enough to take in this whole new concept of a non-geographic local. And so we were a federation of mutual support there. And again, it's the same thing. Being in contact with other musicians gives us an opportunity to learn their songs, to work with them, to perform with them. And that's been a big part of the latter part of my life so far, is that once I stopped working with Bright Morning Star, I partnered up with Karen Brando, and she was a marvelous musician, and we worked as a duo for, again, about 10 years. She died way too young. And I never really got back into solo performing. I just didn't want to work solo after that. So what I've done is I've looked to other people in the People's Music Network, other people in Local 1000, and have been performing with them. And the pandemic opened up this whole possibility of what we're taking advantage of right now. So I was doing a concert a month with somebody, on the West Coast, from Texas, from Seattle, from Florida, whatever. And that has been a real learning experience, learning how to work in this medium with other artists. It's very labor intensive.
Yes.
I pour hours into preparing for those concerts, and so does the person that I'm working with, but absolutely worth it. It's a labor of love for me. You know, I'm probably earning about 50 cents an hour if you've figured it all out, but gosh, I really love it, and I love working with other people. And that said, I've just got back from a solo tour, first one in years, and I expect I'll be doing more of that too.
Cool. I'd like to dial back for a second to 1983, 1984, which is when you and I first crossed paths in Boston, January, at the winter gathering of the People's Music Network. It was my first time coming up there. I don't even remember who told me about it and said, you might want to check this out. I was sort of, one of those musicians, you sort of think you're the only one who's thinking of doing this kind of music. Folk music had kind of faded. Nobody was really talking about it. Political music really, Gil Scott-Heron was like John Lennon were sort of the only guys that I was thinking about as political musicians. Pete was still alive, but I wasn't really connected to him, even though he'd been connected to our family when I was younger. So I come up to Boston, I walk into this school auditorium, and there are 300 plus people there, all of whom committed to being cultural workers, to making this music that is designed to uplift and empower individuals in their struggles, both individually and collectively. And I was blown away. I was so overwhelmed by that experience. And other than Pete, who I already knew, I knew no one there. And I met you, and I met Judy Gorman, and I met Lucy Murphy, and I met George Fulgeniti Shakar, and all these people. And I was in shock. I mean, I have to say, I was honestly in shock. And I was so grateful to all of the people who were there and to all of you who made such an organization possible to exist. And of course, I found out much later how hard it is to do that, as I got a little bit more involved and then couldn't stay as involved as I would have liked. But when I think about it now, and because PMN is still in existence, and it's evolved, it's changed. The membership is still strong, but maybe not quite as overtly active, in part because of the pandemic. But if you had someone like me walking up to you today, looking to find their way of fitting into all of this stuff, and I'm sure you've had this experience with some folks, what advice do you share with them about how to move forward with music that isn't quote unquote commercial, with getting the opportunities to perform, to be heard, and with being a contributor, not just being a participant, but being a contributor to all of this work? What advice would you give to somebody?
I think it would be around the idea of becoming part of a movement or of several movements, to be more than a musician, and to build a sense of alliance with those groups, and then share your music with those groups. I find that being a politically oriented or a cause oriented or a community organizing oriented singer and songwriter is not going to get you an entree into commercial venues. It almost never has been. But we still continue, and we have this real recent growth in political organizing, especially among younger people, and those movements need music as much as the labor movement did in the 1930s and 40s, as much as the Black freedom struggle has needed it since slave times. And we need to continue to bring this music to political groups, and they become a potential audience. I mean, that's pretty much how I was able to begin touring nationally. Was I allied myself and got some fortunate breaks of being seen as a musician allied with and speaking for the anti-nuclear power movement, starting with the Clamshell Alliance. And after spending a couple of weeks in jail up in New Hampshire, I come out and find out that anti-nuclear alliances are sprouting all over the country, and they're all interested in having singers come in. So I had an audience built in because of my work with the anti-nuclear struggle and the lessons that I learned when we were in armories and jails up in New Hampshire, and also not incidentally, back then you could buy a 30-day ticket on the airlines, and right. And it comes out, if you travel every day, it comes out to about $15 a day. I would call up Ted Warmbrand in Tucson and say, I'd like to come out and do a concert. He says, great. He said, how much you charge? I said, $100. He says, well, how are you going to get here? I said, I'll fly. He said, well, how are you going to do that? Yeah. And back then, if I had a Tuesday night without a gig, I'd fly across country just to get a meal. So it was a lot easier. I listened to David Rovix and Pat and Sandy of MS Revolution talk about how expensive it is now to do serious touring, and they rely on patrons to pay their bills, and they find that touring is at best a break-even experience for them. And I used to be able to count on making at least as much money from selling recordings as I did from performing, and that's gone now. I just threw 3,000 of my recordings into a landfill, because I can't sell them. But I couldn't continue to do music if it weren't for the support, in a way, the support of organized labor. Part of my work with Local 1000 is establishing that traveling musicians should be entitled to contribute or have their employers contribute to the pension plan. And so very early on in my history with Local 1000, I've been filing contracts and getting pension contributions. And right now, between my monthly pension, which is guaranteed, and Social Security, which I get because I'm old, I have a higher income than I ever made as an active performer. So I say that because I haven't gone the Patreon route, because I have support from union and Social Security, which labor fought to establish in the 1930s.
Sure, exactly.
I'm very grateful to be basically a subsidized artist in a country that doesn't really do much of that.
Do you also recommend to younger artists that they join their local 802, their local 802 locals? And
it depends on how much they play and where. In order to pay dues to a union, you really have to do, more than a few casual gigs. For me, I have received back cash in hand more money from the AFM that I've ever put out in dues. And that includes things like the Musicians Performance Trust Fund, which pays us to play gigs that are open and free to the public, or this latest thing with a Still Small Voice is a foundation or a charity that has been financing musicians who offer their music free to the public in venues. So all those things have more than compensated for the dues I paid, but I've played a lot of gigs over the years. And I used to travel 180 days a year. And so to answer your question without running around yet another bush, if you perform on a regular basis and if you travel in order to perform, then I would recommend joining Local 1000. And if you live in an urban area and you do most of your music in that urban area, then you should join the local union, because Local 1000 is really not authorized to work out a traveling contract with you. That my contracts are all traveling contracts,
Right.
And Local 1000, which is based in New York City, that's where our office is. They're not going to give you a contract to play a gig in New York City if you're a
Right.
union.
Right.
Yeah,
That
they're
makes
going to
sense.
want you to join 802, which is one of the most progressive locals in the AFM.
Yes. Yes. Got it. So as you look at the world today, and as we approach the upcoming concert on December 9th with Tret Fure, and I had a wonderful interview with her, fascinating person, great history. I'm really looking forward to that concert. I will be there in person, definitely. I love doing by the way, I love the fact that we have the live stream option for People's Voice Cafe, and I've utilized it occasionally because just some nights it's just too crazy to go down there. But there is no substitute for in person, particularly with certain artists, and you're one of those, so I definitely will be there. But as you look, at the world today and the struggles we have today, have you been motivated to write any new music that you feel is particularly applicable to what we're dealing with today? Or do you feel that your incredible catalog of songs that you've written, I'm sure there are hundreds over the years, contain everything that needs to be said about all circumstances, including current circumstances?
Yeah. Well, I'm not. I said when I lived in New York, I was a prolific songwriter. I am not a prolific songwriter. I remember having this conversation with Leon Rosselson, and we sort of agreed that our output does not increase with age. And I think I'm more careful about what I write today. I really agonize over lyrics when I used to just toss them off.
I hate writing lyrics, but I hear you.
I've got one if you want to put a melody to it.
Send it on down. I'm down with that.
All right. We'll see what comes of that. But everything I write is applicable. Okay. I'm not writing a lot of songs about my internal landscape. I find that just a little bit too precious. But when I do sit down to write, it's because I've been stimulated by events that in the greater world around me, and even especially by stories. When I come across a story of someone whose life or whose actions are either a message of hope or a message of warning, I want to put those into a song. So I have a few new songs. Also, I don't rely on my repertoire to put together a concert. I sing songs from the traditional song bag. I sing songs by other artists, and I try to put together a concert that has, some sense to it. So that in a way, it's a little bit like a theater piece. So that one song makes sense next to the other, or one song lifts up where the preceding song had brought us down, or something like that. So I reach far and wide for those songs, so I'll be I don't know what I'm going to do in New York because I haven't sat down and talked with Tret about it. We've done a couple of online concerts, and I've known her for a long time because she was the president of our local,
Right.
And I'm a great admirer of her. So we have to really put our heads together and figure out what kind of a show we want to do. I think there's probably going to be a number of runs of solo songs and a couple of, back and forth, she says, I say kind of a thing. And then hopefully we can put together a couple of duets. We've done those online, although it's very hard to do it on Zoom, but we figured out how. So the important thing is that an audience walks out of a room energized. There's so much heavy shit coming down. Can I say that on
Yeah,
Zoom?
of course.
Coming down, and it's just getting worse. Quite possibly you could do a whole night of songs about how terrible things are.
That's right.
And for me, that would be a mistake. So I'm sure that Tret and I both will be looking for ways to look honestly at what's going on in the world, comment on it, hopefully musically comment on it, and yet leave people with a sense of purpose and hope and possibility when it's all said and done.
Amen. I endorse that philosophy 1,000%. I think that, obviously, when we sit down and when we're moved by an event or a circumstance to write the lyrics, we may be motivated by some of the worst things that humanity has to offer. But in the end, we're trying to soothe our souls. We're not just trying to soothe the savage beast, we're trying to soothe our souls. And if all we do is dwell in the negative, then while we may enable people to identify and cathartically, go through there, we have to offer something that is going to inspire and uplift, just as the Western classical musicians did as well. You can have your Missa Solemnis, but you've got to have your Hallelujah chorus, to make it all seem like, yeah, this is a life that's worth fighting for. It's worth living and loving,
And why are we here, Chris? Why are we here today? Why are we doing this work today? Because this music has energized and carried people. It saved lives and made political change possible. That's what nurtured us as we grew up listening to music. And so, why would we want to stop that momentum?
Yeah, and I have to say, when I came to the People's Music Network, the other thing that hit me when I was being overwhelmed was the fact that there were so many other songs out there that I hadn't heard. And so when you talk about you listening to other people's material, it's not just inspirational musically, it's inspirational in every way. And it was like, okay, yeah, they're telling the story. I may not be the one who can tell that story as well as but they've told it. So that's a song that I can relate to, and maybe I can even perform and share with other people, and carry it on, so to speak. So
yeah, and I love to come across a song that makes me look at an issue that all of us know about and makes me look at it in a new light, from a different slant, that opens up kind of a window of possibility there. I think Rick Burkhardt is great for that.
Yes.
And Tret as well is wonderful for finding different approaches to stuff that we all know is heavy, but do you ever think about it this way, or how about if we go from there to here, kind of stuff. So, yeah.
So before we wrap up, I want to ask you two more questions. First, where can people find you online? Because that is, the way in which we get found these days. Where can people find you and all of the work that you've done online?
Okay, well, the important thing is .org. If you do charlieking.com, you get a realtor in Ohio. And if you Google Charlie King, you get a porn star from Australia.
Hey, I can identify. Chris Owens was a burlesque stripper in New Orleans, and everybody I know who's looking for Chris Owens.
It could be a double bill.
That's right. It's either an X-Files actor, a basketball player.
Find the right venue to put the two names together.
Yes, she died though. Yes. Yes. So yes, charlieking.org.
Charlieking.org.
Okay.
And that's got my calendar, the gigs that I'm doing. And it also is a place where you can either order or download all of the recorded music that I've ever done. And then Charlie King Musical Storyteller is the handle that my good buddy Grace McHenry has created for me on Facebook. And so there's that. And then it takes a little bit of searching. I'm trying to remember how you narrow down the search, but I've got a YouTube channel, and I've been doing these Zoom recordings and also have been videoing my recordings when I can on the road. So I've probably got 30 full concerts and a lot of individual songs up on my YouTube channel. And I think if you put in like Charlie King folk singer or something like that, you can get to my channel.
Or Charlie King concert, maybe?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Okay. All right. All
I'm
right.
trying to think of what is there. There's a phrase that Facebook uses. It's not like theme, Charlie King theme, anyhow.
A tag. Well, those tags, that they stick.
Yeah.
You have to
So, if you go there and you look at my playlist, there's one category. It looks pretty innocuous. It says virtual playlist, and that's where there's probably 60 hours of concerts there. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's great, isn't it? Back when I made recordings, I couldn't put the first CD up for sale before it was all available for free on YouTube. So,
that's interesting. So, what else would you like to share with us that we haven't covered or talked about today, if anything?
Well, I listed group, Bright Morning Star, People's Voice Cafe, People's Music Network, Local 1000 as being enormously supportive. People's Voice Cafe has been the way that I've been able to bring my music to New York City for, how long have we been around? 40 years?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
45. It's 44 this year.
There you go. Because I was there at the beginning, thanks to Ray Corona and Marion Wade, and I've played every year. And when we couldn't play because of COVID, we did an online concert. So People's Voice Cafe is a great venue. It always has been, and I'm very much devoted to it and very grateful to be talking to you. Grateful for the work that you do, Chris. It's important to keep that venue alive. During COVID, they just dropped like flies, right? So to keep a venue alive takes a lot of work and a lot of dedication and a lot of spark, brilliance, genius to keep. And you're doing this now. You're finding new ways to make people aware. We're back in the carry our vinyl records around and show up at an open mic kind of a thing, and you're opening up possibilities for people to hear this music and know about what's going on. So I'm real grateful to you and to People's Voice Cafe for doing that.
Well, thank you. I know one of the other challenges that we face is finding and encouraging new / younger, although they don't have to necessarily be younger, but new audiences, new artists who will bring those new, continue to cross-pollinate with their perspectives, their voices on today's world and the traditional music as well. And it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge because, I look at my two boys, who were raised essentially on television and a lot of popular culture, and whatever it is that they know that I've exposed to them, they know. But there's so much competition now for people's attention. We are a short attention span society. It is not healthy, in my humble opinion, but it is who we are. And so adapting to it, whether it's using social media more effectively or whether it's listening to the songs that are coming out today and finding out a way to make those styles work for the messages we want to, work. It's a challenge. So we will see. I'm very encouraged that People's Voice Cafe can't stay around, but we're all trying to do new things to make sure it does. So thank you for your support. So, well, this has been wonderful, and I'm really looking forward to December 9th, 2023.
Me too.
Seeing you and Tret here in New York at People's Voice Cafe, and I hope you have a wonderful week. We're only 2 weeks away.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Chris.
All right. Thank you, Charlie.